So 2024 found director Jason Reitman helming an original title after a slight, well, let's call it detour, where he followed in on his father's footsteps and continued the Ghostbusters series. But does this title represent a return to form of the once critically acclaimed director, or is it just another mediocre title? That's exactly what you'll find out in this episode. I'm Pedro from Vinyl and Celluloid, and this is my review of Saturday Night. So there was a time when the name Jason Reitman really got movie buffs excited, myself included. His output in the second half of the noughties was terrific. I mean, a string of hits that resonated with both critics and audiences for Oscar nominations. And yeah, I guess these titles positioned the director as a darling and rising star of the so-called indie movement. But in the 2010s, Ivan Reitman's son struggled to maintain the same level of success. And look, I haven't seen any of the movies he made during this period, so I'm not even suggesting that these movies are bad. I just never had a particular interest in watching them. And I think this also goes for a large number of audience members who no doubt agree that the titles the director released in the last decade lack the same gravitas as the output he had delivered before. Summing it up, I think we all know that he was around and audiences were aware of his existence, but the work just didn't seem relevant enough. And I think the same can be said about Saturday Night Live, the iconic NBC variety show, once a revolutionary staple of post-primetime television that served as a stepping stone for iconic comedians such as, well, Eddie Murphy, Bill Murray, and Phil Hartman. The show simply lost its edginess. And you can tell just by the fact that audiences no longer tune in for full episodes, but rather enjoyed the occasional ad hoc skit on YouTube. Since the show started almost 50 years ago, we've seen the show straying away from the caustic tone, the eagerness to tackle all sides of the political spectrum, and in recent years, the struggle it has found to produce a single rising talent. And speaking of talent, I think that the show always featured players with massive egos, but it used to showcase, let's call them toxic pricks with questionable behaviors, who possessed enormous talents. I'm thinking of Chevy Chase. Instead, these days the show just showcases talentless, unfunny, toxic morons with questionable behaviors like Pete Davidson.
I ran to the front door saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God."
That's so funny. Last time I heard that, I laughed so hard I fell off my dinosaur.
And despite the obvious and subjective parallels between Reitman's career and SNL's popularity, the source material, the hours that immediately preceded the first broadcast of the iconic show, make for an interesting subject matter. Alas, Saturday Night does the show and its original performers a great disservice. So what is this movie really about? 11th of October 1975, 10 p.m., New York City's 30 Rockefeller Plaza. That was the time and place where a media revolution happened. That revolution is chronicled in Saturday Night, where we join aspiring Canadian producer Lorne Michaels as he navigates the 90 minutes that preceded the first broadcast of a new variety show, Saturday Night Live, at the time known as NBC's Saturday Night. This behind-the-scenes expose covers the manic process behind the pilot episode, detailing innumerable key players and the uncountable conflicts they were involved in. An unseen battle between NBC's top brass and iconic late-night host Johnny Carson, the forces of destruction that placed Chevy Chase as the show's unofficial leader and nursed his insecurities, and the drug-filled atmosphere involving cast member John Belushi, host George Carlin, and virtually everyone on the set. And the sense of awe, self-doubt, bravado, and sometimes delusion that populated the minds of Michaels and his ragtag group of sketcheteers, the not ready for primetime players. Adding to all of this, we are shown other, more mundane, challenges faced by the production team, such as last-minute script changes, set designs, and costume fittings. Jason Reitman chose to portray the backstage story by resorting to a set of quasi-long takes, something we've seen a lot these days in the likes of Birdman and 1917. This creative choice perfectly summarizes the air of self-importance we find in this project. Sadly, beyond this creative choice, there's really nothing else to back it up. The lack of structure tries to symbolize the chaotic nature of production. Still, instead of expanding the mythology behind the once great show, it minimizes its aura and contributes to a movie that comes across as utterly reductive. Modern day audiences who generally have the attention span of a peanut aren't familiar with the show. To them, SNL is just a factory that occasionally produces something funny with the potential to go viral. No more, no less. It was Reitman's duty to display how the show pushed boundaries and uncovered new ways to think about comedy. Failing to do that results in a movie where those unfamiliar with the show's early days remain focused on finding reasons to care. Of course, this is backed by the inconsistent, borderline tone-deaf portrayal of its real-life characters. The not ready for primetime players are presented as a bunch of drug-addicted basket cases who think they are the best. And hey, most of it may actually be true. It was the 1970s after all. But the portrayal of these comedy legends comes across as reliant on mere caricatures that summarize the players as walking, talking stereotypes. Outside of the Chevy Chase character arc, one of the movie's highlights carried by a stellar performance. I mean, Corey Michael Smith is Chevy Chase, in the sense that much like the actor he portrays, he is the de facto leader of the movie and the lead performer. But yeah, outside of this outstanding highlight, every single major feature player is treated almost as if they were an afterthought. The takes from Jane Curtin and Garrett Morris are painful and cringe to watch, with the latter shown, or at least portrayed in a worse way than the actual role and treatment he had during his stint in the show. Dan Aykroyd is reduced to a mere horny hound dog that seems to exist for the sole purpose of giving Lorraine Newman and Gilda Radner something to do, reject his advances. And well, the least said about John Belushi, the better, with Jason Reitman's Saturday Night featuring the worst portrayal of the iconic comedian since that dreadful biopic 1988's Wired. And that's saying a lot. This bipolar portrayal of unidimensional characters expands to the supporting cast as well. I mean, J.K. Simmons and Willem Dafoe are excellent as Milton Berle and David Tennant, respectively. On the other hand, the talents of Matthew Rhys and Nicholas Braun are just totally wasted. Reitman's script treats the iconic George Carlin, played by Rhys, in a way that doesn't reflect either his genius or his personality. And Jim Henson, one of the two characters played by Nicholas Braun, seems like he's a totally fictional character and not the beloved man behind the Muppets. Braun's second role as Andy Kaufman is much better, but pales in comparison to Jim Carrey's 1999 take on the comedian. The episodic, if unstructured, nature of the movie is uneven as well. The battle between old talent, represented here by Johnny Carson and Milton Berle, versus new artists, virtually everybody else, is well portrayed and truly embodied by Reitman's use of new faces and established actors. But everything else is overly sentimental and mushy, fleshing out the paper-thin characterization of the comedians. Watching Saturday Night doesn't feel like a chore, but it's certainly a suboptimal experience. As a fan of the show's early days and as someone fully aware of its impact and legacy, this feels empty and almost soulless, with very few opportunities to smirk and not enough dramatic impact to change my views or opinions about some of the show's aspects, and certainly no new piece of information. Lorne Michaels is adequately shown as the show's mastermind, but his creation and struggle in getting it on the air is downplayed by the romantic side plot. Oh, by the way, when are we addressing the continuing Hollywood trend of having Rachel Sennott in what can only be described as Jew-face? Bottom line, Saturday Night should have taken a less is more approach and simplified the plot. Just show or tell us a story about a bunch of inexperienced, aspirational young comedians who are relatable and are trying their best to deal with their insecurities and do something meaningful. If Reitman had gone down this road, we would have ended up with something closer to Bill Hader's Brilliant Stefan, and something far, far removed from whatever unfunny imitation we got from Pete Davidson.